Rajamouli just took what is Indian cinema to its absolute audacious limits. How Indian stories are told. He's taken it to its absolute audacious limits. It's a very audacious film, very audacious film. Satish was one of the brightest guys I've met. He was very, very bright. He could make anything, play any part, and make it real, or comic, or whichever way you wanted it. We missed it. I mean, listen, he went too early. He had a lot more to give. I wanted to make Pani as an Indian production. I wanted really to be an Indian film, and therefore I came back to make it, even though at one point I was thinking of making it in Spanish.
Shekhar, so we are here to talk about your film, What's Love Got to Do with It. So, I'll just start off by asking you, an Indian director making a film about Pakistani and British families for a global audience. Is that the ideal summation of this film?
Well, it's Pakistani immigrant families in the... Yeah.
Yeah.
I would not call them Pakistan. Well, yeah, of course they're Pakistani immigrants. So they're really British Asians. That's how I would best do it. They're British Asians.
Of course.
Yeah.
Right. So was that the thought over here that, we've got to tell this story it's a rom-com end of the day, but yet to get those cultural references in, was that the thought behind making this film?
See, the script was written by Aamir Khan, who was, married to Imran, and she was married in Lahore, and a lot of that is inspired. It's not what she experienced, but inspired by her experience the culture in Lahore. And when I read the script, I realized that actually families, immigrant British Asian families in London, exactly the way we are, So one of the reasons I wanted to make this film is that it's that families, that's the first thing. Number one, this idea of, well, first, families, whether they are Chinese or they're Indian or they're Pakistani or they're Jewish families in New York, exactly the same. The politics of the families are exactly the same. In fact, world over, whether, when it got released in Sydney or Italy or Spain, people would say, oh my God, my grandmother's exactly like that, Spanish. Or they would say, oh my God, my parents are just like that. Or in New York, somebody would say, do you know how hard my mother tried to get me married to somebody she liked? So it is just as Jabanga wrote about what we call British Asians, and they were of Pakistani descent. I have my experience about being Indian with 42 first cousins. So I know my family and how it goes. And so it's it's a universal idea in this film. Two things. How do you find love? Thing. What is love? To me, I came with the attitude is love is a huge mystery. And as long as it's a mystery, it survives. When it stops being a mystery, it dies. Love is a longing. Longing dies, love dies. Love is a yearning. A yearning dies, love dies, right? And the other thing is that in the modern world, suddenly women have become liberated. I was in London when the first liberation happened, when the pill came. And suddenly they were liberated from the fear of pregnancy.
Right.
Now a girl can decide in a dating app who she wants to go out with. It's not just a man. And so that's gone, where the girl has to be shy, Kinni siani hai, kinni pyari hai, all that's gone, thank God. Now she's equal.
Right.
She can as much decide who she wants to go out with, even who she wants to have sex with, on a dating app. It's not just the man's choice, it's her choice. So that's changed. And in the context of that, the choice is not that, the choice is huge. You can go onto a dating app, and so the main character, actually Zoe, the main character, that's why I was fascinated by her. And Lily James is a huge star all over the world now.
Right.
A big heartthrob. But she and I talked a lot about this is, if you're addicted to dating apps, what are you really doing? Do you really think that you can find... The idea of love is also the idea of finding intimacy. We are, by nature, we human beings need to be intimate. And one of the greatest psychological issues that come across is when you lose intimacy. And we can see it in social media. When the intimacy is only through social media, everybody gets anxiety attacks and problems. So that's something to watch. But when you're born, your first great intimate act is that you're put on your mother's breast. That's so intimate. And then when you die, what do you want to do? Give me my bank statement? No. Can I hold somebody I love their hand? That's the last thing you want to do. So we are by nature looking for intimacy. So how do you find love? How do you find intimacy in a world that is full of choice?
Right.
So much choice. So choice of the choice to act, as against the idea of the decision is made by the family in terms of you will marry this girl. And in our family, we don't call it arranged, we call it assisted.
Assisted marriage, yeah.
So it's just the two things. And it's not just British Asian families, it is all over the world. I don't know a single one. Do you remember that film, My Big Fat Greek Wedding?
Of course.
The girl decided to marry a non-Greek in the US, living in the US, generation in the US, and her Greek family rebelled. In Crazy Rich Asians.
Yeah.
How could the guy make his own decision?
Right.
The decision has to be made approved, or let's say approved marriage. We are calling it assisted. Is it arranged, assisted, or approved? That was all about approval. No, the grandmother has to approve the girl. The mother has to approve the girl. It's quite stunning how that is all over the world. It's the same thing. So one of the reasons I wanted to, even though it's a rom-com, I concentrated on the heart of it. On the emotion of it, and said, worldwide be the same. Right? So that's what I love making about this film, is to make it more universal.
Right. You've just mentioned on it, sir, but in times of social media, in times of these dating apps, do you feel the perspective of love has changed? You mentioned it, it's still about intimacy, but has the focus on say a longer companionship or that Romeo and Juliet and Heer Ranja wala love, has that sort of gone away now?
Well, those films are they're fables. So love is not something that you tie a knot on and it stays and that's it. Yeah. And they live happily ever after, or they lived happily. Romeo and Juliet lived happily ever after in the ever after. But that's never. The concept of love cannot change. The opportunities are multiple. But love is one of the most frequently used, most misunderstood, most banded word without actually trying to understand what it is. But that's for a good reason, because love is a mystery. It always will be. Because if there's no mystery to love, then it cannot exist.
Right.
Just like life, if there's no mystery to life, what is life without a mystery? If you knew exactly what was going to happen the very next 5 minutes forever or next day, you'd probably kill yourself. Because what keeps you going is the uncertainty. So love will always be uncertain. And it'll only be alive if it's uncertain. So your question is, has social media changed it? It's made it a little more confusing because the word now love is taken on multiple meanings without really understanding that love is a mystery. And let's talk about that, It is. So even if you so this is my soulmate, if the idea of soulmate ever exists. This is my soulmate, you find somebody, you're going to live with them, right? For the rest of your life. You say, I love you, you love me. Hidden in that, 2 words, 2 lines is, I own you, you own me. True. Right? And the moment ownership comes into it, you know that love is dying because there's no more mystery. There's no challenge. There's no more getting up in the morning and saying, this person that I've lived with for the last 20 years, what am I going to discover about this person today that I didn't already know? Why am I going to sit in the sun? Why, if every sunset that you are watching is the same, exactly the same, why would you watch a sunset? And then the person that you've been going for, say, 20 years, holding their hand, watching the sunset. Every sunset is different, so every hand holding is different.
True.
So it's the process. It's the evolution of love. Even when you fall in love, it's the evolution of love. Am I getting too philosophical?
No, you're not. I love his philosophical, isn't it?
Yeah, it is completely.
It is. So moving on a little bit, I have to ask you, of late, we've seen a lot of representation of not just brown characters, but their stories as well in Western cinema. But what do you think has ushered that change? Is it filmmakers like yourself who've been, who've represented the community in the West for like almost 2 decades, 3 decades now?
No, there are many reasons. What you say, the brown people, let's say Asian people, let's just use the word Asian instead of brown, their voices are being heard. And because their voices are being heard, and they're becoming directors, they've gone behind the cameras, they're becoming amazing writers, and they're becoming amazing writers, as these Oscars really proved, right? And so because their voices are being heard, therefore, they are pushing forward, and therefore, their stories are being heard, and therefore the story is becoming more relevant. So let's say, Everything, Everywhere, and Everything Else, Michelle on the Oscar, wasn't born of a movement. It was born of a realization that there's a huge market for this.
True.
And let's face it, we are Hollywood or any other movie business is very market driven.
Yeah.
So suddenly there's a market for it because people like, what you call Asian people are suddenly different. I mean, how can you handle, like, when China can make a film that makes in its own country, in its own nation, makes $1 billion, you can't ignore it.
Yeah, true.
The Crazy Rich Asians makes $400 million. The biggest hit Indian film ever was actually Slumdog Millionaire.
Yeah.
Made $500 million.
Yeah.
No, the director was not, but the novel was Indian. It was shot in India. All the cast was Indian. It was $500 million. So as people realize that there is this new voice coming in and there is a market for this, so there are more films. So I think actually much more than me. People like Rajamouli have done it. I went out and I got nominated for 9 Oscars for my first film.
Yeah.
But it was still Elizabeth. It wasn't about us. Although I made it through the lens of an Asian person, the eyes or mind of an Asian person. But Rajamouli just took what is Indian cinema to its absolute audacious limits. Right?
That's true.
So in a way, if it's just about Indian cinema and how Indian stories are told, he's taken it to its absolute audacious limits. It's a very audacious film. And that's why people are loving it.
Right. So when you sort of look back at your own career post Bandit Queen, do you ever feel you should have you could have made more Indian films?
I did try. I came back and spent 5 or 6 years trying to make Bandit Queen. Now, a lot of things happened. I did try and make PAANI.
PAANI, yeah.
Yeah, and I spent 5 or 6 years in India trying to do that because I wanted to make PAANI as an Indian production. Funded out of India, because one of the things that I always felt was Slumdog Millionaire, even though it did $500-600 million worldwide, not called an Indian film. Right? So I wanted really to be an Indian film, and therefore I came back to make it, even though at one point I was thinking of making it in Spanish.
Wow. Okay.
In Mexico City, for example, because where the problems are the same.
Right.
Attitudes the same, and the confrontations and the culture is the same. So I came back. So I lost about 5 or 6 years of my life at that time. But yes, I want to make a film in India now. I am. And because everybody says to me, "Oh, why don't you make Mr. India 2? You make Mr. India 2,
Yeah.
And I know what they're saying is that, can you make a film? They're not really saying Mr. India 2. I mean, it can't be serious.
Yeah.
Right? I am actually planning one, which is kind of the Indian Harry Potter.
Wow. Okay.
And I'm not making Harry Potter,
But
but I,
the Indian equivalent to it.
that genre.
Hmm.
That genre of Harry Potter, because I think that we can in India, with the market we have, and kind of, we are so used to things that are otherworldly in our, we grew up with that.
Yeah.
So I now developing and probably make, or at least cause to be made, a film like a franchise like by Harry Potter, that kind of a franchise that comes out of India,
Wow.
not out of the West.
Wow. That'll be something, sir. That'll be
Yeah.
something. I have to ask you this, sir. This is an excerpt from your very good friend and your colleague in What's Love Got to Do with It, Shabana ji. Or recently, when Masoom completed its anniversary, we carried an interview with her. It was an old interview, but I'll just quote this. I want you to react to it because this is very fascinating. She said, talking about you, even during Devanand's Ishq, 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 Shekhar used to talk about physics and the cosmos. Film is one other thing he does, but his interests lie beyond them. He has evolved more in search of that eternal quest. As a filmmaker, he has honed his craft well, but his most important relation on the set is the one he has with his actors. That makes him a terrific director to work with. He loves his actors infinitely. He's patient with them. He inspires them to give what he wants rather than stuff his ideas down their throats. How do you react to all of this? Has she got the summation of you right?
Right, because for me, the search for love, the longing for love is the longing to understand the nature of the universe we live in. It's the same thing, right? The only one thing she's wrong is her last sentence, where she says that I inspire and work with the actors to give me what I want. No, that's not true. I actually allow and find ways for the actors to find the characters in themselves, and then give them the courage to say, now relate to the characters as if it's you. You have to find the character inside you. And then I create this, what I call the circle of love and trust. And I trust you and trust yourself that you will come out with the character. That's what I do. Not because if I knew acting, I would be a major star. I'm terrible. Right? I don't know how to act. I learn acting, a little bit of acting I learned when I get back to television from my experiences, Nasir and Shaban, and all, watching them act. As a director, watching them, I learned. No, only the rest is absolutely true. She's got it on.
Okay.
But which artist is not in search of the infinite? That's the very nature of art, isn't it? True. The very nature of art is to try and connect ourselves with the infinite, because that's the only way to talk about it, because otherwise it's just a mathematical equation that cannot be true.
Agreed, sir. I've got just two final questions for you, sir. I have to ask you about Satish, sir. It was so fascinating, reading up about him, unfortunately, after he passed away. But the most fascinating thing for me was he started off as your assistant on Mr. India and then sort of graduated into the calendar character. So how did that journey go about?
He started off as my assistant in Masoom.
Oh, of course, Masoom as well, yeah.
He was my third assistant in Masoom. And the story is really interesting because, as usual with every director, there's a line of people wanting to join as assistants. And Satish was one of them. And I noticed this guy. He would smile at me. One day I was catching a flight to Delhi, and Mumbai was deluged with monsoon. And it was impossible. I almost missed my flight. I had to wade through water. And as I was standing in the line, I saw Satish Kaushik coming to me, completely dripping wet. And he said, "Sir, I had to actually swim out of my house to come to you, but I knew that nobody else would come to see you here." So that was a longing he had, for cinema. And there was another thing I remember when we were shooting Masoom. He was the third assistant, and sometimes the director gets angry, he'll scream at somebody, try hard not to scream at the actors and things. And I think he found me shouting sometimes, and he came to me and he said, "Sir, can you do me one thing, Shekhar? Can you?" I said, "What?" He said, "If you're screaming at anybody, just scream at me." Oh. And I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, that's the way people will notice me." अरे इसकी ऊपर भी चिल्ला रहा है. So Satish was one of the brightest guys I've met. He was very, very bright. And an underrated actor. He could make anything, play any part, and make it real or comic or whichever way you wanted it.
Yeah.
In fact, it is his direct, because he came out of the National School of Drama, because he understood, when you go to National School of Drama, you are either directing or acting some of the best plays ever written all over the world. So you come out with a very deeper understanding of telling stories. So that's what pushed him to be a director. But I've never been less than astounded by his performances.
True.
And Calendar was a lot of him. It was a lot of Satish in it.
Yeah.
It wasn't me telling him, aisa karo, just lines. It was constantly creating, very creative on the sets.
Nice.
We missed it. I mean, listen, he went too early. He had a lot more to give. Yeah.
True. So have you heard that story? I mean, is that true that Aamir wanted to be an assistant on Mr. India as well, and he didn't get his chance?
Yeah, no, he wanted to be my assistant. I can't remember which film it was, but he wanted to be my assistant. He came and Satish sort of said no. He'd come after a tennis game. He still had his tennis racket with him, but he came in shorts. I from what I remember.
Okay.
But this was true. Aamir says in his interview, I read the interview, he said,
Yeah.
actually, he said, no, he said, how can if he's my assistant, how come I don't have a car? How can he come in a car? Somebody, Aamir said now in the interview, but actually he'd come in a borrowed car. And, thank God, Satish said that. Had he been my assistant, he would not have made all these, he would not have been the big star. Who knows? But he probably, who knows?
But I can imagine Satishji saying that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Final question, sir. I've asked you about rom-coms. I've asked you about your career thus far. But going ahead, there are really exciting projects that we've read about. Are you making the Shiva trilogy, and are you making the Amitabh Ghosh movie as well? What's happening? I mean, what can we look forward to?
Let me take them one by one. The Shiva trilogy is actually lying with a producer, and their budget is very, very expensive. Amitabh film is now, it was based on Field of Poppies, his novel. But really what we turned it into was taking all his books and actually making a series called Opium.
Yeah.
And understanding what happened during the Opium Wars. Right. And so that's in development. PAANI is something I would dearly love to make, and I am making strides now to reconstruct that project. And I'm looking at the genre of Harry Potter coming out of India.
I'm really looking forward to that one, sir.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, sir. Great. So thank you so much for having me, for speaking to me. And it's always a pleasure.